Hey everyone, welcome to the Friday, November 8th, 2024 election roundup episode of On Iowa Politics. This week, it's all about the 2024 general election. So let's get right to it. Hey everyone, I'm Erin.murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, our Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief, Tom Barton. Tom, how's your post-election hangover going?
Uh,
Let me say no more. Let me decode that for you out there listening. That means, oh my God, am I so miserable? I am so behind on sleep. I need about 3 weeks off. Thanks for that, Tom. Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is with us. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm all right. Definitely could use a little more sleep, but I think otherwise doing okay.
All right, that's good. That I'm all right though. That sounded like a little bit of a Midwest. I'm all right, which really means I'm dying inside. Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal with us. How you doing over there in Western Iowa, Jared?
727 days until Election Day 2026, Aaron.
Breaking news on the podcast: Jared McNett has just been fired from the On Iowa Politics. We very regret to say that he will no longer
Sicko mode in full effect.
Oh man! All right. Well, let's get to it, and let's start this election analysis discussion with the presidential election in Iowa, and specifically that last Iowa poll, which, by the way, came out after we recorded last week's episode, so we didn't get a chance last week to talk about it then. So, in case you don't follow politics or have been in a bomb shelter last 10 days, which may not have been the worst idea in the world, by the way. The last Iowa poll showed Kamala Harris with a 3-point lead in Iowa, but Donald Trump won the state by 13 points. That's, well, I don't need to tell you what that is. Iowa poll director Ann Selzers has told the Des Moines Register this week that she's conducting an analysis to try and unearth how that last poll missed the Iowa electorate so badly. And again, as a reminder for any listeners who may not be familiar, I think most of you probably are, but if for those who aren't, this is a pollster with an extremely high, sterling reputation. The phrase "gold standard" gets tossed around all the time. The Iowa poll has done a better job polling Iowa voters really than any other outfit. So that's what made this so staggering. And honestly, this one's going to be hard to shake. I'm sure we're all surprised by that the Iowa poll missed the mark by that much. Has anyone come up with or heard any theories why? I'll be honest, I don't have a really super good explanation other than it's always been hard historically to find all the Trump voters out there. We know that in polling. Has anybody got any other brilliant ideas?
I haven't heard any solid theories as for why the poll missed the mark so much. I mean, as you mentioned, for 8 years, pollsters have been striving to accurately capture former President Donald Trump's level of support among voters. While the Iowa poll in 2016 and 2020, was one of the only a few in the country that accurately assessed Trump's strength going into election day. As you mentioned, unfortunately, it failed to do so in a big way this time. Why? I don't think we're really going to know until we see the results of Ann Selzer's and the Des Moines Register's review and post-mortem of the polling, and until we get more granular data on turnout in Iowa, including age and gender breakdown of the results at a precinct level. On the national level, we were told by pollster after pollster the results would be tight, that essentially it was going to be a coin toss with either candidate winning by a slim margin. Obviously, that didn't happen. And one explanation we keep hearing, and that I've heard as well in Iowa, is that pro-Trump voters were reluctant to tell pollsters how they were voting. The so-called shy Trump voter. Many have hypothesized in the past that there's a subset of Trump voters only supporting the former president behind closed doors and shy away from revealing their political preference to their friends, family, and especially pollsters, because elections and our politics have become more polarized over time. One Republican strategist I talked to in the state mentioned that the shy suburban Trump voter, and that while the Iowa poll, you know, showed this swing among suburban women and women in general to Harris, you know, wondered and maybe I guess hypothesized that it failed to also capture those shy Trump suburban voters in Iowa. The other thing that the Republican strategist mentioned to me is that, you know, while Harris, you know, very well may have, you know, pulled ahead and, you know, had inroads with uh, suburban women in Iowa motivated by the abortion issue and other issues that were at the forefront of this race, he wasn't seeing any indication that she was putting together kind of that same coalition of voters that Barack Obama assembled in 2008 and 2012. You know, he wasn't seeing any indications that you know, she was building support among voters in those pivot counties clustered along the Mississippi River that voted twice for Democrat former President Barack Obama before swinging in favor of Republican Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. And in the theory, the hypothesis there is that maybe there was a flaw in the polling in being able to accurately reflect voter sentiments and reflect the electorate along those pivot counties again that swung from Obama to Trump. And then, you know, as far as I'm aware, the only, I guess, hypothesis that we've heard from pollster Ann Selzer, and she, I believe she told this to the Register, to the Register's Brianne Fanninsteel, saying that, you know, while she, you know, didn't have you know any clear indications. You know, one thing that she did mention is that that there was some give in the poll, and that neither candidate reached 50%. And you know, I guess speculated that the people who said that they had voted would vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could easily have switched to Donald Trump, and that late deciders could have opted for Trump in the final days of the campaign after interviewing was complete, and that people who had already voted but opted not to tell, you know, poll questioners or poll interviewers who they voted for could have given Trump an edge. I think the Iowa poll showed that Kennedy uh, who ended his presidential bid but was still on the ballot, got like 3% of the Iowa vote, and then fewer than 1% said they were going to vote for Libertarian presidential candidate Chase Oliver. I think 1% said they would vote for someone else, and 3% weren't sure, and 2% didn't want to say who they were casting a ballot for. And so I think Selzer told the Register's Brianne Fanninsteel that you know she hoped to maybe gain clarity on that 9% and underlying disposition toward the presidential race.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to hear what comes out of that analysis, and again, because you know, any poll being off by that much would, you know, turn heads and be worth talking about, but the fact that it was that one, just really surprising.
I would just note too that the polls for the actual swing states were actually pretty close to dead on. The ones that were
Yeah.
accused of like hurting and all that sort of thing, they ended up being about right in line. And honestly, like it wasn't just the poll for the Harris Trump race that was off. The polling for the four House races was just as bad, if not worse. The max margin of error for congressionals was 7.2. There was a 16-point advantage shown for Christina Bohannon, and she's going to lose by zero point 0.2. So that's a huge miss. And then in the second district,
It's almost exactly the same as it's 16 points, which is almost exactly the same as the Trump Harris miss. Sorry, Jared,
yep.
keep going.
And then in the second, it showed Corkery down 3. She lost by 16. The third district, it showed Bacom up by 7, and he lost by about 4. And then the fourth district, it showed Melton down by 16, and he lost by 34. And when I saw the polling for the 4 congressional races on Sunday, I really started like thinking about how off the presidential poll might actually be, because
Yeah.
there's no recent history to suggest that the fourth congressional district would be a 16-point race.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. There's no evidence of that, and there wasn't on Tuesday.
That's a really good point. And I remember, but I didn't connect the dots like you did, Jared. I remember having a similar reaction over the first district numbers. Like everybody all throughout that had said, this is a close race. This is really competitive. It's going to go down to the wire. So for
hmm
those congressional breakdowns to say plus 16 just did not make sense for that election. I will say, man, I suppose Ann Selzer deserves credit for putting that poll out, knowing how much of an outlier was and believing in the data that they thought they had. But obviously, it wasn't representative sample and even at all any close way. So yeah, it'll be interesting. The other thing I'm going to mention real quick before we move on, I've also found the reaction to this poll in the political sphere fascinating. Um, like there's a lot of anger about it that I don't quite understand. It's a poll, right? I mean, polls are wrong all the time. Um, there's just a lot of anger and Schadenfreude and it like I said, it's just been fascinating to me, and I honestly can't quite wrap my head around it. You know,
Well, some of it is people just not liking news media. I mean, that's flat out
well,
some
yeah,
of it, to be honest.
I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. And any chance to dunk on the media they can get, they'll take. Yeah.
It also, like, at least for Democrats, like it was a poll that they thought, hey, this is gonna indicate how the Midwestern blue walls, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
is gonna go. This is, indicative of how the rest of the Midwest is gonna go, and the rest of the polls are wrong. And Ann Selzer is this gold
Right.
standard pollster. And I think it gave Democrats a lot of hope. Like Ann Selzer's poll went viral, like on social media, especially
Mm-hmm.
among Democrats, saying, "Hey, Harris might run away with the race." And then on election night, obviously, Trump won resoundingly. And so I think also maybe some of that anger may just be disappointment and for setting up expectations
Mm.
pretty high for Harris and Democrats in Iowa, and then being let down.
Yeah. So I can't remember one of the posts was I don't remember if it was this phrase exactly, but it was something to the effect of and it was clearly a Democrat saying that to Ann Selzer, you dangled the dream and then took it away. So yeah, there was definitely some of that sentiment. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Feel
Well,
free to, if you have any other theories out there, feel free to at me. I'm genuinely curious. You were going to say something, Jared.
yeah, this isn't a theory, but while we're talking about kind of the presidential race in Iowa, it is interesting too, and this happened in plenty of other places in the House and in the Senate. Two of the 4 congressional candidates in Iowa outperformed Harris. Bacom and Bohannon both outperformed Harris in those districts.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good point.
Yeah, really quickly, I was going to ask you, Jared, I haven't done the math on this, but does it look like the Iowa poll was off by the same amount in each race?
Well, let
I
me
was
look at my
doing the
notes
quick
again.
I was doing the quick math in my head as he listed those off, and I think it was like 11, 13,
So let's see,
18,
16-point advantage for Bohannon. Meeks wins by point 2, so that's about
about
the exact
16.
same. Corkery down 3, lost by 16, so that's
There's a
about the same.
13. Yep.
Bacom up 7, lost by about 4, so that
That's an
one's a
11
little
point.
different,
Yeah.
but still kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Melton one down by 16, and he lost by 34.
So
So
18
that's
point miss
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah.
So interesting there, Jared. As the districts got more conservative, the misses got bigger. Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, we won't. That won't be the last word on on that one. I know I heard from someone who said Fox News spent 15 minutes on it the day after the election, which also is fascinating to me. You got 24/7 news. I guess you got to talk about something. All right. Speaking of, you got to talk about something. Let's talk about the actual election itself here, huh? I think it makes the most sense to start it in the first district. First of all, it's number one numerically, so it makes most sense that way. And it was the closest, exactly as we expected all the way along. That's nice when it works out that way, right? We've been telling you all for months and months this was going to be a close race, and it was. So that feels good. Pat on the back, everybody. Sarah, Marinette Miller Meeks, as of now, looks like she's gonna win. There may be a recount. What's the latest going on over there in the first district?
Yeah, well, Tom's really been covering the on the ground campaign.
Tom loves recounts, so that's he can't get enough of first district Eastern Iowa recounts, so he jumped on that one.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think just the results, it was as close as expected. Like Jared mentioned, Bohannon did outperform Harris like quite a bit. Bohannon didn't do as well as Rita Hart did in some of the counties, like Scott County in 2020. But I went through in every single county in Iowa, or in the first district, excuse me, Bohannon got more votes than Harris Walls, like raw vote totals. And you would think that like each presidential candidate would get more votes.
That's
maybe
wild. You're
than
not talking
congressional.
about, so you're not talking about percentages even. She got more votes, period.
Yeah. And
wow.
and a higher percentage of those votes
right.
in every
That
county
is,
in the first district.
wow.
And there are only two counties that went for Trump and then voted for Harris, or excuse me, went for Trump and then voted for Bohannon as well. Like, and that was Scott County and Jefferson County. So I also just thought that was interesting, like Scott County in particular. So Iowa's third most populous county, home to Davenport, Bettendorf. This is the first time that Scott County has voted for a Republican at the top of the ticket since Reagan in 1984. So Scott County was really kind of the last holdout for among the like Mississippi River counties that went Obama, Trump. And it was still close. I mean, like Hillary Clinton got like a percentage point more votes than Donald Trump in 2016. Biden got about 3 percentage points more than Trump in 2020. But then this year, Trump got 4 percentage points more than Kamala Harris in Scott County. So yeah, but then Bohannon, I have to go back and look at my story, but it was a couple thousand votes Bohannon got more than Harris. But I think it was 2,500 votes. Wow, Bohannon got more than Harris in Scott County. I'm not sure what that means. If that means, obviously, there was a lot of spending on the first congressional race, promoting Bohannon, and the presidential candidates largely ignored Iowa. That really stood out to me. So I don't know if it's a combination of Bohannon was actively campaigning, if it's an indication of her strength as a candidate or indication of Miller Meeks's maybe weakness as a candidate, or Kamala Harris's weakness as a candidate in Iowa. Right. So that's what really stood out to me about that race. Tom would probably know the latest on status of a recount.
And before I get to you, Tom, to piggyback off that, Sarah, one thing, I talked to a political science expert yesterday for a story that's going to run over the weekend. Shameless plug, watch for that. And just talking about the election results. And one of the things he said about that race, and maybe this is part of that calculus that you were just trying to work out there, is that Bohannon did a little bit better in the rural, maintaining the margins in the rural counties than than Lennon Bacom did in his rural counties in the third district. So he it was Chris Larimer at UNI, who's outstanding, and he said one of the things that he noticed early on is that whereas Bohannon lost some of the counties in the rural counties in like the 60-40 or 70-30 at worst range, and whereas Bacon was losing him more in the 80-20 range. So maybe that's something that Bohannon did a little bit better too, was managed to keep down those margins in the rural counties. Tom, what's going on with the recount? Are we going to have one or not?
Don't know. So, Christina Bohannon has not conceded the race. It's still too close to call as of 3:30 p.m. on Thursday. And as far as I'm aware, the Associated Press hasn't called the race either. I can't remember if we mentioned this or not, but as of right now, Republican incumbent McNett Miller Meeks leads Christina Bohannon by 799 votes out of more than 413,000 cast in Southeast Iowa's first congressional district. Christina Bohannon tweeted or posted on X yesterday saying that, again, in her view, the race is too close to call, and they're expecting more ballots to come in over the coming days, and we will ensure that each and every lawful vote is counted. Um, the thing is, it's unclear how many ballots are outstanding right now, and those are largely going to be provisional ballots. But I talked to Derek Muller, University of Notre Dame law professor, former University of Iowa law professor, nationally recognized election law scholar, and I was talking to him about the prospects of a recount and the differences between 2020 and this election. In 2020, it was kind of a roller coaster race that seesawed and narrowed from like a 282 vote lead for Marionette Miller Meeks before a district wide recount began, that then narrowed down to a 47 vote margin after late arriving mail and absentee ballots and provisional ballots were counted, and after precinct reporting errors were corrected in Jasper and Lucas counties, and then after the district wide recount and eventually narrowed to that historic 6 vote margin. Right. Um, and then there was also a never resolved 131 ballot discrepancy between a recount board's tabulation of the absentee ballots received by the Scott County auditor and those that were included in the county's certified canvass of election results after election day. So again, with no late arriving ballots this go around due to a change in state law that said that absentee ballots had to be received by the county auditors by the close of polls on election day, and absent any known precinct reporting errors, the chances of finding enough outstanding votes to overcome a 799 vote gap is essentially slim to none, is what the Notre Dame law professor Derek Muller told me. In Iowa, it's not there's no automatic recount provision. Candidates and campaigns have to request a recount as of now, as of 3:30 p.m. on Thursday. Christina Bohannon has not requested a recount. Um, and it's a decision that probably won't be made until late next week. So counties will canvass the vote Tuesday or Wednesday, because Monday is a federal holiday. It's
Right.
Veterans Day, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Correct.
counties will canvass the vote Tuesday or Wednesday. Depending on what comes from that canvass and how many provisional ballots come in, and what that does to the unofficial results will depend on what decision Christina Bohannon makes about whether to move ahead with the recount. And I believe under Iowa law, she's got 3 days to make that decision. I believe she's got 3 days from when the counties complete their canvass to make that decision.
Yeah.
Sarah, something I was curious about, since we talked about how much better Bohannon did than Harris Walls. What do you think accounts for people voting for Trump and then not voting for Meeks? Because obviously that happened just based on what the splits were.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. You'd have to really do a deep dive into the data, like if maybe there were more people that left certain races blank.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
Combination of that with people who, yeah, maybe just liked what Christina Bohannon had to say. Maybe they met her or saw her ads and liked her message better than Marionette Miller Meeks's. It's really hard to say. I don't know. I was surprised honestly to see that. I thought people would be pretty straight ticket on things, and so
Not the case.
really don't know.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to try and wrap your head around because the the voters that I talked to and heard from at the Marionette Miller Meeks watch party, it was kind of hard to imagine the kind of voter we're talking about here, a Trump Bohannon voter. So yeah, it's fascinating. So, as always, plenty to dig into the data in the coming days, weeks, and months. Just a quick clarification. I looked it up. So we have the official information. The counties will do their canvases on Tuesday and or Wednesday of next week. So the 12th and 13th. And then the recount deadline is, I don't know why it lists two dates, Friday or the following Monday. So it says Friday, November 15th / Monday, November 18th. Oh, I guess it depends on when the county does theirs on the 12th or 13th. That one makes sense. Okay. And then there's a little bit of window and it's all got to be done. The state canvass is December 2nd, which is a Monday. So we'll see. It's interesting, but I think Tom hit the high points there, and Derek Muller is a fantastic source and expert on the topic. 800 votes is a lot different than 6. That's a lot of it. We've all been through these recounts in elections over the years, and the numbers can and often do change, but usually by very, very, very small numbers. I mean, we're literally, even in congressional elections, we're usually talking in the dozens. Certainly
Right.
not 800. But I also get it from, a campaign's gonna, you put a lot of effort and resources into it. So far, I get why you might want to fire that last bullet, so to speak, and just on the off chance that something funky happens. So, but we'll see. All right. What else should we talk about? That, I guess, really quick. We don't cover the race, but we mentioned Zach Nunn and Lanon Becom there. Nunn's victory was a little more comfortable, but again, that lined up with what we were hearing pretty much throughout the campaign, right? That they were both close, but Nunn seemed a little bit safer, and that turned out to be the case. Did that surprise anyone? Yeah. No, yeah, I'm with y'all. I don't know that there's much to say on that. Again, man, our observations and our sources were really good, and to Jared's point, the polling was not too shabby, at least on the general election race. I guess we're talking about congressional ones. We didn't have as much public polling, anyways. I don't know what the internals said.
While we're talking close races, did the closest state legislature race end up being the Trone Garriott one?
I think so, and I was just going to segue to the
Okay.
state house races anyway, so that's perfect. 19, right? Which is
Yep, 19
amazing. So
points or 19 votes.
you got to assume that there's a recount coming in that one, and that's a county where there may have been some provisional ballots cast because of this Secretary of State's non-citizen voting challenge and other reasons as well, and there may be ballots still coming into that one. So we'll see what that looks like after the canvass next week, and then boy, it's hard to imagine there won't be a recount in that one. And then same thing in Nate Bolton's race here in the eastern edge of Polk County, eastern edge of Des Moines into Newton and Altoona there. His was really close also, so that'll be interesting. Jared, I should know this off the top of your head. JD Schulten hung on. Was it close?
So he ended up winning by about 600 votes, which was
Oh,
like,
okay.
what is it? It was like 6 points or so.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
funnily enough, both he and this is another race that I mentioned last week, Josh Turek, who had the closest race last time
Yes.
around. They both won by about 600 votes to remain the only Western Iowa Dems in the legislature. But at the county level in Woodbury County, the Democrats were not lucky at all. They lost all the open county board races, and Pat Gill, who had been the auditor for 28 years, lost by about 6 or 7 points on Tuesday. So it was pretty much a wipeout as far as that goes.
Interesting. And we had talked about that, Jared. You had mentioned the county auditor race, because I remember mentioning that as you mentioned, Pat Gill's been around there a long time. And I'll be honest, I had missed that one that he did lose. So yeah, that's noteworthy. The fascinating thing, Sarah, before we get to the big picture of the state house races, which we will definitely address, how, just kind of largely speaking, how did things go in the Quad Cities area?
Pretty much incumbents won the state house races. There's one that's close. Incumbent Monica Kurth. She represents a district that's like, it's like South Central Davenport, West, including a small town of Buffalo, and like to the Muscatine County border. So it's a little more rural, and she is within, she leads by 47 votes over her opponent. Her opponent's name is Nathan Ramker. He's a Republican who was nominated by special convention not too long ago, and he's a first-time candidate, CBD shop owner. Worked really hard, he says, door knocking and things, but he didn't have a lot of funding. He was not a very well-funded candidate, and so this was he was excited to get this close, and I think he told me that he's going to request a recount in the race. So
okay.
So yeah, so that was the closest race in on the state house level in our area. The county supervisor's race, there was an an appointed supervisor who was a Republican who appears to have lost her first bid for election to a Democrat. So it's about 80 votes that separate the two. So I'm not sure yet if there will be any kind of a recount. We'll see, but it seemed like there were a couple of no party candidates that seemed to be Republican leaning, and so it seemed like that could have maybe tilted it in favor of the Democrats if some Republicans picked those no party candidates.
Yeah. And then the other interesting one there, not because it was a close election, but because of what led up to it, is it's the one House seat that Democrats flipped, and it's only because the Republicans didn't wind up with an incumbent. Lou Stoltenberg dropped out of the race. At what point? Remind me, Sarah. Was it before the primary?
Oh yeah, it was before the filing deadline.
But then no Republican ever stepped up. They didn't nominate anyone, right, which was surprising and interesting, because that was a very competitive race 2 years ago, right? Didn't Stoltenberg win by like a really small number?
Yes, that's correct.
So that's just kind of interesting that and no Republican wanted to try for that seat. And so that's the one Democrat pickup, which leads us into the big picture, which was fascinating. Democrats went into this election with fire in their bellies. They're running on the new abortion restrictions, the private school financial assistance vouchers, if that's the term you're familiar with, and some of the other recent laws that Republicans passed, and Republicans gained seats in both chambers again, which was again, and it's going to be fascinating to see the impact of that in the next legislative session. There's some, you're seeing that on the national cable networks to talk about the discussions that the Democratic Party has to have. I got to believe there's a similar discussion needing to be had in the Iowa Democratic Party right now as well. I think specifically at the state house level, I mean, Christina Bohannon and Lennon Bacom, I don't think anyone is walking away from those. Well, I don't know, maybe they're similar questions there, but I mean, I think clearly Trump probably had some coattails here. When the top of the ticket wins by 13.
He actually had
Oh,
he
we talked about
outpaced
this, haven't you?
yeah,
Yeah.
he outpaced like a lot of the House and Senate candidates. That's one thing that's weird is like the swing states. It looks like most of the senators from those swing states that were Dems are going to hang on, even though he won all of the most important swing states.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I know the one in Wisconsin for sure, for obvious reasons. By the way, was that just last Saturday? I forgot to mention this is also Sarah Watson's last time on the podcast after that Badger Hawkeye game last weekend. So we're gonna be light next week. Um, was that just last Saturday? My
Yeah.
God, time in an election year is just ridiculous. Um, so anyway, so yeah, but for sure at the state house level, there's got to be some meetings of the minds about how to move forward in the Iowa Democratic Party. I mean, whatever is the current game plan has not been working, and I don't know if I don't claim to have the answers. I just see the scoreboard.
For our district, like Ryan Melton was already doing that yesterday after he was conceding. He had a long thread, and one of the things he said that I ended up quoting in my like post race story was Democrats should also own up to the fact we had corporatist legislators within our ranks within the past 50 years that jumped on board in the ramp up of industrial ag and CAFOs that became self-defeating, not just for Democrats, but for just about everyone in rural Iowa, as that drove more and more small and mid-scale farmers off the land. And then he goes from there for like quite a few more tweets.
Yeah. Well, and it's always interesting to hear from those fourth district Democrats, right? Because they're in the heart of the country where they're not just talking to the bubble, right? They're having
The
to talk to
hinterlands.
right.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking to people who disagree with them because they're outnumbered so significantly by those folks. So yeah, it'll be interesting. What else stood out to anybody in the election, or what are we all working on as we follow up on the aftermath?
Well, I was just gonna mention, so the state of things with the state legislature. Obviously Democrats lost more seats, but they did win a few tough fights.
Yeah, it was.
They unseated State Senator Brad Zahn of Des Moines, a key member of the Republican caucus in the Senate. Was ousted early in the evening by Democratic challenger Matt Blake in that suburban district. Is that largely Urbandale?
Yes, yeah, Urbandale and Johnston.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And a suburban district where you had voter backlash against the state's abortion ban and the so-called school voucher bill, the state assistance for private schools. And then, but while Democrats ousted Zahn, Republicans defeated Nate Bolton, Democratic leader in the Senate, who was in consideration, I think, at one point for leadership, right?
Yeah, well, and ran for governor in
Yeah, that
the
right.
in the primary in 18. I guess that would have been right. Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was an interesting one. Bolton knew. Well, I mean, Zahn knew he was being targeted to and I think this may have been a little bit true about his district too, but especially in Bolton's district, I know for sure redistricting really changed his, and I think it did Zahn's as well, but Bolton's changed. Like, he used to be a Des Moines senator. His entire district was in the city of Des Moines, and it got slid out to, like I said earlier, part Des Moines, a little bit of Altoona, and I believe Newton as well. And so getting into some of the more outside of the city of Des Moines. So he had some work to do, and was edged out, and that is another one that we could still be talking about next week as one of the ones that's headed to a recount. I can't remember the margin on his, but it was low.
That's two cycles in a row now, right? That the Dems have picked off like leadership Republicans, because Didn't Jake Chapman, wasn't that last
Yes,
time that he lost?
that is correct. Also in the Des Moines suburbs, a little more western area, and that's now Sarah Trone Garriott,
Right.
who I can't remember if we've mentioned her yet here on the podcast. Yeah,
19
won by
votes.
19 votes. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So
Tom, I'm glad because I was thinking about this. I'm glad that you mentioned the turnout as related to abortion because it is clear that that did have an impact, like in Missouri, which is pretty red. Like an abortion amendment passed in Missouri by more than a few points, and like so it did drive voters to the polls, but it was not nearly enough, obviously, in places like Iowa or some of the like actual swing states to help Harris or other Democrats.
yeah, I think and when you look at some of the other initiatives around the country that passed as separate questions, I think one of the things we learned this week were that we already knew that these policies were generally popular, that when there's been other ballot members and other measures in other states, regardless, including in red states like Kentucky, that they definitely have leaned towards the pro abortion rights, pro abortion access side. They've been very successful as their standalones. And they did again when it was just that specific question on these ballots, but as a overall motivating factor in just electing people to Congress or state house or president, it does not appear that it had remotely the same kind of juice. I keep using the phrase all the time. Is it a lever pulling issue? And it doesn't seem to be, again, unless it's isolated, where it
It's that
clearly is.
it's that cliche that, you've heard plenty of people talk about that people like Democratic policies, they don't necessarily like Democrats. Because in Kentucky, there's a vote on school choice, and that one got rejected by
Yes.
the Kentucky voters.
Yep, a pro school choice amendment of some sort, and that was rejected. Yep. Yeah, I haven't seen them all since because some of them are close. But as I was watching on election night, the only abortion access measure that failed was in Florida, and part of that was because it needed 60%. It didn't just need a majority. It had a majority, it just didn't get to 60%. So
that happened in Nebraska too, although that one was a little more convoluted because there were competing
because there were two of them, right?
Abortion rights, amendment.
Yeah. Did they also have a higher threshold, or did they just need a majority?
No, those were just a majority vote.
Okay.
I think, Jared, when you asked about who's the Trump Bohannon voter and what issues are animating them, I think that there's so many factors that probably go into that, and it's probably different for different voters. But Bohannon really hammered on the abortion issue. That was over and over and over again. That was in advertising and mailers, and Miller Meeks had to constantly be on the defensive on abortion. So that could be one of many factors that was in that race.
I would totally buy that because that would line up with Missouri, where the Senate race wasn't close, the presidential race wasn't close, and then abortion passed. So there were Republican voters that were voting for codifying abortion.
Fascinating stuff. All right. Any last things before we put the wraps on this one? We'll think of more and we can talk about them next week. But and we got to get Todd's take too. Todd couldn't make it today. Pints and Politics will be over by the time you listen to this, but hopefully, if you're in Cedar Rapids, you caught him, Todd, and Tom in Althea there. Otherwise, we'll make sure we get Todd's take on the election next week.
Well, Erin, as our also erstwhile Wisconsin correspondent, was there anything from Wisconsin that surprised you?
I think, not necessarily that the state went for Trump, but it was I think the relationship between that and that Senate race, and that Tammy Baldwin held on despite Trump winning the state, but just how close it got, but also that some of the margins and this does align with what happened in other states, and that blue wall that Trump just did better, that Harris didn't run as well as Biden in some of those areas, and that's like some of the suburban counties over in the Milwaukee area, especially Dave Weigel's critical Waukesha County. So yeah, I thought it was interesting in that Wisconsin was kind of aligned with Michigan and Pennsylvania that way. But despite that, and as you alluded to, one of those states where the Democratic Center held on. And I know Tammy Baldwin, you know, when I say popular, that's acknowledging the partisan world we live in. She's clearly not popular with a very, very specific segment of the population, but she's been a fairly popular senator, so it's not surprising to see her hold on, but interesting that it was as close as it was.
This is kind of a little haha joke, but I see South Carolina went for Trump by 18 points. So, I don't know. Are Democrats going to still look at South Carolina at the start of the caucus season? Or not caucus season, excuse me, primary calendar?
Right. Well, same thing, right? Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, I did have this random thought at one point, either late Tuesday or the next morning, and I thought to myself, like, there's an argument that Iowa Democrats could make, like, we didn't put a candidate through the ringer. Maybe that wasn't a good thing. Maybe our candidate would have been better. I don't know if there's any validity to that, but it's an argument they could make, and we should go back to the process that put Barack Obama in the White House. And oh yeah, that just happens to be back when we started with us.
I am actually glad that you mentioned that some of the what ifs, Aaron, because something I have no time for after any one election is people making these grand pronouncements about what it means going forward, because it's a sample size of one, you know what I mean?
Right.
And yeah, anybody that is dead certain about what this means for 2026 or 2028 or 2032, you should not listen to this.
change the channel as soon as you hear that. Jon Stewart had a great bit about that on the Daily Show the other night, and they had a great montage of all the grand pronouncements being made by election anchors on national TV and cable in the wake of going back to 2008, and a few cents about what it clearly signaled, that it clearly sent about, and they were literally all spectacularly wrong. So yeah, beware the grand announcements. Anybody, that's why I said, if you ever hear a reporter, a journalist, a political observer say, you know what, I don't know yet, stay tuned to that person. Follow that person to the ends of the earth. The one, we know some things, but we don't know everything, and we don't say that enough. So find the people who don't know, and you're in good space. That's why this podcast is so great. None of us knows what the hell we're talking about. You can take that to the bank. All right, that'll do it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You can also find the podcast each and every week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. And speaking of those, please get to our sites in the next few days. If you missed any of all of ours election coverage, it's still there. There will be more to come, I'm sure. I know for a fact there is from the Gazette. I'm sure the Lee gang is working on follow-up stuff too. So now's a great time to be tuned in and following along. The team here has done a lot of great reporting in the last week or two, and I know we'll continue to moving forward. And remember to also subscribe to that On Iowa Politics newsletter, where I'll bring you all those stories, and get subscribed to that at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. By the way, those papers and their websites are the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, and our producer Bailey.cichon, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.